Hi everyone, my name is Jen and this is Beast House of Plants, or Top of Things Houseplant and Home Design. Welcome back! Today's video is going to be, I guess, like a beginner's guide to buying rare plants, or a very practical guide of what you absolutely need to know before you start spending a crap ton of money on plants. I've definitely spent my fair share of money on rare plants or uncommon plants. You could see all the unboxing videos right here in this channel. I've spent probably too much money on plants, and this is everything I have learned in the past year that I started collecting plants. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm hoping to answer pretty much all of the questions that I see over and over again in either like Facebook groups or people DMing me. The first question I get is kind of like, what's a top cutting, or, you know, like what are the different kind of segments of a plant that you could buy from the internet, right? The first kind of plant is obviously the most ideal type of plant. That is a full plant with roots. So usually on Facebook, people will say either like fully rooted, which means that this is a well-established plant. Usually this also implies that the plant is actively growing at the moment. Also, people will sometimes sell like partially rooted plants, which means that there are definitely roots on this plant, but it was recently transferred into soil from like either like moss propagation or water propagations. So it hasn't been in like the pot for a very, very long time, but there are roots. And then you can obviously also get cuttings. So in terms of cuttings, a bottom cutting usually means that it's from a bottom section of a plant, and why this is less favorable than a top cutting is that when you have a bottom section of a plant, that plant needs to develop a new growth point before a new leaf can emerge. Because obviously if you took, you know, a piece of a plant from the very top, that was the part that was actively growing, it got kind of like chopped off, so then it needs to develop this new growth point, which means that it'll take much longer for this plant to start growing again from when you receive it. When you buy a bottom cutting, you also need to double check whether or not that cutting has roots or not. Obviously, if it has roots but no growth point, that is more favorable than if it doesn't have any roots at all and it also doesn't have a growth point. That's kind of like the least favorable type of cutting you can get. Obviously it is, you know, a little bit cheaper to get a bottom cutting or a middle cutting. A middle cutting is, you know, just a section from the middle of the plant, so no roots and no growth point. So yeah, sometimes people will either specify that this was a bottom cutting but it already has a new growth point, which means that they took a cutting a while ago, so they've, you know, they've let the plant have some time to develop this new growth point before they sold it. So I feel like that's also okay, but then you have to remember about buying either a middle section or a bottom section of a plant is that because it's a new growth point, the new growth, which is the new leaf that is going to come out of the plant, is going to be significantly smaller in size than the other leaves. So let me show you an example. Okay, so this is my Philodendron Splendid, or my Philodendron Melanochrysum crossed with Varicosum. So this was sold to me as a full plant in LECA already, so I didn't transfer it into LECA. But I decided to take a cutting when I first got it, just because sometimes I'll take cuttings from my own plants as insurance if it's like a really, really expensive plant. Because if something, you know, happens to one section of the plant, at least I have another section. So this is the size of the leaf that I got when I first got this plant. This is, you know, quite large, almost as large as, you know, my hand. And this is the new growth. So as you can see, because I took a cutting from down here, this new growth is considerably smaller than the leaf that was there before. So obviously over time, once the plant matures, the leaf size will once again increase, but just, you know, keep in mind that if you're buying a bottom section of a plant, the next leaf likely will be considerably smaller than the original size of the leaf. If you buy a top cutting, the new leaf might be a little bit smaller, but it'll be less smaller, or it'll be more similar in size to the plant before it was cut. So yeah. So, which also kind of explains why top cuttings are more expensive and more favorable. If you have a top cutting, then because there's already a new growth point, the plant just needs to root. And once the plant is able to root, it'll keep on growing new leaves to a much more comparable size immediately right off the bat. Okay, so another kind of like thing that I've been seeing lately is people selling nodes. Nodes are basically just a section of the stem that has the node, but there are no roots, there's no new growth point, there's no leaf, right? I'm just gonna say don't buy them. Do not buy node cuttings. I understand that the price point is very, very low compared to if you were to even buy like a cutting or a full plant, but it's not worth it because nodes are incredibly hard to propagate. Even very, very experienced people with plants have difficulties rooting nodes, and you know, it's just really not worth it if you're just starting out and you're just beginning. I feel like if you want to experience like trying to root a node, you should start with a plant you already own. So, you know, try it once with like your pothos or your philodendron, like Brazil or something like that. So that you can just see how hard it is to root a node. Because there's no leaf, it's very, very hard for that cutting to photosynthesize. And if you don't give it the right amount of like moisture, it'll just dry up. And if it's dried up, obviously it's gone because it's a section that's like this big. It's also very, very easy to accidentally rot a cutting that is that small. So you have to make sure that you have like really, really good airflow. It's just also really hard to propagate in like sometimes people throw them in like prop boxes and stuff. But then it's also very easy to rot that way because there's not a lot of airflows in prop boxes. So I was gonna do a whole video at the beginning of this year on node propagation because it was like a thing that I was starting to see a lot. A lot of people were selling elbow nodes for like almost $100. So I was curious. So I bought about 6 different nodes from 6 different plants. A couple of them died before they even got to me, because that's the other thing, because they don't have any roots. They're really bad to being shipped. So a lot of times by the time they get to you, it'll already be too dry and be completely dried out, so not usable at all, or it'll be completely rotten because obviously when they're being shipped there's no sunlight in the box. They're sitting in really damp material with no light at all. So it's really, really not worth the risk. I can't stress this enough. Just don't buy node cuttings. And like, if you do buy node cuttings, like don't spend more than like $25 or $30 on a node. Like it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. It's so much better to buy, or it's so much better to save up for a really long time to buy a full plant and then eventually take cuttings from that plant to trade with other people than to try to get a bunch of different plants by buying node cuttings. I bought about 6 nodes. I think 2 of them died before they even got to me. Like 2 of them died like from me, and then I think 2 of them survived. 1 I still have, and the other one I ended up selling. But the thing about both of those that survived is that they both had a little bit of like, they had like tiny roots when they got to me, so that gave them kind of a head start. So yeah, just don't do it. Obviously, like, I understand that I am not the most experienced plant grower. Like, I've only been doing this for about a year, but like, it's really just not worth it. Like, it's not worth it. Okay, now that I've gotten off my soapbox about no cuttings, the next tip is that some plants ship better than other plants. So, you know, to figure out kind of like what plants ship better than other plants, you could either, you know, just ask sellers, like people who sell plants a lot will know which plant ships better than other plants, or you could just watch like a ton of unboxing videos to see how a plant arrives. Like plants like the Philodendron varicosum is a notoriously bad shipper. It's doesn't handle being, you know, cooped up in a box very well. So that means that if you really want a Philodendron varicosum, it is much better for you to buy a rooted Philodendron varicosum because they're bad at being shipped, right? So like if you buy it rooted versus a cutting, like that gives it more of a chance, it'll be more likely to survive that way, versus just a cutting. But a plant like, you know, the Splendid, this hybrid is much easier to grow and much better at shipping than the varicosum, so you can kind of get away with buying a Splendid cutting if, you know, that's something you were interested in. Okay, so the next tip is like very obvious, but if the look that you are trying to achieve with your plants is like the big giant velvet leaves, you know, then you gotta just buy bigger specimens from the beginning. You can't buy teeny tiny cuttings like they're this size if the look that you want are like the giant leaves that are like the size of your body. Like obviously, like yes, they are technically the same plant, and eventually if you give it all the right perfect conditions and a pole, etc., that one will become the other, but it takes like years for that to happen. Like that kind of maturity takes a very long time, not like a couple years, like years and years, and those conditions are very hard to achieve indoors unless you buy a mature specimen from the beginning. So, you know, obviously there's nothing wrong with buying like smaller plants if that's what you want, but if the look that you are going for are like those huge massive beautiful leaves that you see on Instagram, then I would recommend that you save up for a very long time and just buy a bigger specimen. So yeah, that kind of comes down to personal preference, but it is worth mentioning. Okay, so if you've never ever bought a rare plant or uncommon plant or expensive plant before, this is the order in which you should try to acquire those plants. First, you should try to acquire it from someone locally. You know, a lot of places will have Facebook groups locally for, you know, people in the same area that enjoy plants. There are a lot of people in this hobby now, so more likely than not, you'll be able to find someone that will either be willing to trade for a plant with you or, you know, to sell a plant to you locally. Just put out like ISO looking for Philodendron melanochrysum, is anyone selling? So yeah, obviously if you buy a plant locally, then first of all, that person has been growing that plant in a very similar climate as your house and where you live, so the plant won't really have to acclimatize to a new place. Obviously you don't have to pay for shipping, which is great, and the plant won't be stressed out from being shipped, because being shipped is stressful for plants, especially since you know, the weather can be either like really hot or really cold. Those are both terrible times to buy plants online, so you should definitely look locally first. If there are no one is selling what you want locally, then the next place you should try to score that plant is from a well-established company like Steve's Leaves, like Logi's, or Gabriella Plants. Obviously, there are a lot of people trying to buy plants from these companies, but the reason that I think that if you are like new at this, that you need to buy from a company like that versus an individual seller on Facebook is because they have live, they have warranty. They have a live plant guarantee, which means that at the very minimum, you will be guaranteed that the plant will be alive when you receive it. And if for some reason the plant is not alive when you receive it, they'll refund you the money. Obviously, you should double check what the guarantee is for different websites and different companies because it does vary from website to website. Like for Steve's Leaves, they have a live guarantee, but you also have to contact them immediately and you can't repot the plant for 30 days. So you have to make sure to check between the different companies, but at the very minimum, you are guaranteed to receive a live happy plant from those companies, and those plants will only sell you fully rooted established plants that is actively growing. And if you're new at this, that's obviously the best option. So I would just like really try like a million times to get a plant from one of those places before you go onto Facebook. And then obviously the next best option is to buy from a Facebook purge group, like Time to Splurge and Purge. I have a whole other video on exactly how to buy plants. I'll link it here. I think it's literally called How to Buy Rare Plants or something like that. So definitely watch that video. I outline it from A to Z on exactly how to navigate those types of Facebook groups. Okay, another video that I want to shout out is a video that I made a while ago called My New Plant Protocol. I'll link it up here, where I go over what I do once I finish unboxing a plant, because obviously when people do unboxing videos, that's where the video cuts, is after they finish unboxing it. You know, that video will go into full detail, but some kind of like key highlights is that one, you gotta quarantine your plants away from all your other plants. Even very, very well established nurseries get pests. It's just a part of owning a lot of plants and having a lot of plants. Like, pests is inevitable. So you need to quarantine your plant, the new plant, away from all of your other plants, just in case, you know, it has a pest on it, because you don't want to ruin your entire collection because of one plant. The second thing is to not mess with it. So if it's already in soil, to not repot it immediately, because the plant is already stressed. You know, most plant companies like Steve's Leaves, etc., will recommend you wait a week. I say you should wait at least 2 weeks, or I mean, excuse me, most companies like Steve's Leaves or etc. will recommend that you wait a month. I recommend that you wait at least 2 weeks before you repot. And honestly, usually I won't repot unless I really, really hate the soil that it came in. For me personally, I'm an overwaterer, so if a plant came in like 100% peat moss or 100% potting soil, I have to repot, or else I will overwater it. But unless it's like the worst, most terrible soil ever, it's way better just to adjust your watering schedule with that plant, and try to leave it into the pot for, you know, quite a long time. Obviously, if the plant came in like, you know, a paper towel or something, then you need to put it in a medium like sphagnum moss or water or something like that. Okay, so I think those are all the tips I have for you. If I missed anything, you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!